Since October 7 last year, Israel has engaged in a large-scale assault on land, air, and sea, a military assault that is, on the Gaza Strip. The Gaza Strip is a narrow strip of land, approximately 365 square kilometers, and it's one of the most densely populated places in the world. Now, the United Nations, the General Assembly, they have expressed grave concern, and that's a quote, grave concern over the catastrophic humanitarian situation in the Gaza Strip and the suffering of the Palestinian civilian population. And with the United Nations Security Council noting in particular the disproportionate effect on children. The destruction wrought by Israel on Palestine, on the Gaza Strip, is so extreme that Gaza is now a different color from space. It's a different texture. This was part of what was presented before the International Court of Justice as the South Africa brought a case of genocide against Israel. Joining me on the program now is LaLu Hanuman. He is part of the Caribbean Against Apartheid in Palestine movement. And he's joining me now to talk about the case at the ICJ and the continued acts of humanitarian crisis that is continuing in Palestine, in the Gaza. Welcome to the program, sir.
Good morning, Ms. Faria. Greetings. I just want to apologize. The neighbors cutting grass next door. I have no control over that, right, in terms of the background noise.
Okay,
yeah.
I'm hearing it slightly, but we'll work through that. The weed eaters from hell. Someone needs to bring a case to the ICJ about the use of weed eaters around. They're dangerous things. Yeah. But so we saw what South Africa did, and they are the world example of people who have suffered under an apartheid system. When you talk apartheid, the South Africans know what you're talking about. And they have gone ahead and said it is their duty to go ahead and bring this case against Israel, charging genocide, saying that in things that Israel has failed to do and in things that they have done, that this is genocide happening. And I know an attorney in Grenada said to me, we are watching for the first time a genocide being live streamed. Now, your organization has been very vocal, speaking out and demanding that the people of Palestine be given an opportunity to protect and to defend themselves and to live as human beings in their own territory. As you saw what South Africa did, is this one of the most important developments from the world stage? Because it calls for the world to act. Is South Africa now standing on the highest ground in terms of the world response to this crisis that's continuing there?
Well, South Africa deserves the maximum applause to be given to them because of their stance. They've led the world on this issue, and of course, it's only right that they should, given their history. It would have been nice if CARICOM could also have joined in, but unfortunately, with the exception of St. Vincent, which has issued a very positive statement in support of the South African action, CARICOM has been largely silent. But certainly, yes, South Africa deserves maximum applause for what they're currently engaging in.
Now, the court, the ICJ cannot create a binding situation where they can stop Israel from the bombardment, but certainly they can issue a strong directive saying that you need to stop. How much weight is this going to carry? I mean, is this symbolic or is this expected to carry any weight at all?
Well, the ICJ, the International Court of Justice, which was established in 1945, is one of the 6 arms of the United Nations. And in reality, it ought to be abided by their judgments and their decisions and their orders. But in reality, that is not the case. For example, back I seem to recall in the 80s, the early 80s, the International Court of Justice criticized America for its role in funding the Contras in Nicaragua. They said it was a breach of the sovereign rights of the Nicaraguan government, Nicaraguan people. But America just totally ignored it. Also in the past, the same court has said that the barrier wall being put up by Israel, or that's now in place, is also a breach of international law. And again, Israel ignored it. So they don't have any implementation powers. However, in terms of this particular matter, um, the, South Africa has applied for what's called a provisional measure because they're saying that there's irreparable prejudice that would be caused if the situation would be allowed to continue pending their ultimate decision on the genocide matter. And if the International Court of Justice were to support that position, that that there ought to be a provisional measure pending their ultimate deliberation and decision on the issue of genocide, and countries continue to supply arms to Israel, they would also be in breach of of not only of the court order but also of the Genocide Convention. So we could have a situation whereby, in theory, the British Prime Minister, if he uh, continued to supply arms or allow arms to be supplied to Israel, could himself be charged with complicity in genocide. Uh, um, in fact, Article 3 of the Genocide Convention, it says that is an offense. It also constitutes an act of genocide to directly and publicly incite to commit genocide. And obviously, to provide armaments in these circumstances would be to incite to commit genocide, in effect, if that was the ruling of the court, that as a provisional measure, um, arms sales or arms supplies to Israel should be stopped. But as I said, the court itself is a toothless court. It doesn't have any enforcement powers. It's just based on international law and what ought to be done. It doesn't have a team of bailiffs, for example, or marshals, as a domestic court would have, that can go and implement its decisions. It just leaves it up to the international community to implement whatever it decides. So that is the sad reality.
And so, Mr. Hanuman, the Israelis have said that they will not stop until they have crushed Hamas. And one of the reasons the Israeli Defense Force has given for attacks on refugee camps and zones that had been designated as safe zones that has caused this immense civilian casualty is that Hamas is operating within the civilian zones and they're hiding in hospitals and so on. This is what the Israeli Defense Force has said to excuse the murder of innocent non-combatants. Can we see this being prolonged? There's nothing that forces and binds Israel to stop the bombardment, and their target is the destruction of Hamas. If they don't achieve that, can we see this going on and on? Where does this end? What room does the international community have to stop this mass killing of innocent Palestinians?
Well, Israel, in effect, is an American baby. Of course, it was set up by the United Nations in the late 40s.
A very naughty American baby.
Well, it's more of a ferocious American baby than naughty. I mean, naughty is too soft a word. But as long as America supports Israel, Israel will do whatever it wants. Unfortunately, America at this point in time doesn't seem to want to reign in Israel. I presume there are votes involved in this in terms of the next election. As we know, the presidential election is this year. And the Zionist lobby, the Israeli lobby in America, is very, very big. I was in England just a few days ago, and when I was coming through the airport, I saw a free newspaper. I thought it was The Guardian. Just as I alighted from the plane, and I took it up with the intention of reading it on the train into London. But it turned out to be the Jewish Chronicle. It just had JC on it at the top in small letters. But and they were openly saying that the Israeli lobby will be in full force in America during the forthcoming presidential elections, that they will be interfering in American elections. And nobody censors them for that. You know, we hear all this talk about Russian interference in the American elections, but the Israelis treat America as part of their backyard. In fact, I believe it was Hugo Chavez of America who said that the Pentagon is Israeli occupied territory, which it is, just as the West Bank is Israeli occupied territory, Gaza is, East Jerusalem, and in fact, if you're going to be factual about it, the whole of Israel is occupied territory, but that's another discussion. But certainly, the Pentagon is also Israeli occupied territory.
But with no matter how strong this Israeli lobby is and what's at stake with upcoming elections in the United States, with 23,000, almost 24,000 people as of 2 days ago dead, another 8,000 missing, believed to be under the rubble, a few other thousand just missing, no one knows where they are. Uh, 84 journalists killed, the bulk of them being Palestinian journalists. The death toll, the carnage, it's mind-boggling to watch. How powerful can this lobby be in the face of human casualty? Or is it because of who the victims are that they will be able to just allow this to go on, that the lobby will be stronger? I mean, there's some very strong lobbying, but these are human lives we're talking about
Well,
here.
unfortunately, in America, a lot of Christian fundamentalists, they consider Israel as it exists as a biblical entity. And they have quite a powerful vote in America. So as well as the influence of the Zionists through the media, etc., there's also the Christian fundamentalists or evangelical types who also support Israel. So there are votes involved in it. And as long as that is the case, I mean, take Florida and Cuba, for example. The reason why American presidents are reluctant to lift the sanctions against Cuba, and in fact, Trump actually now has designated Cuba as a terrorist state, and Biden hasn't changed that designation, so Cuba is even more pressure under even more pressure now, is because of the votes in Florida, the Latino votes, which would mean they're winning or losing Florida. So in order to appease that electorate, they've maintained this stance against Cuba. And the same thing applies in this context to do with Israel. In terms of the votes, the potential votes from the Christian fundamentalists, the Christian evangelicals. And as I said, the pressure as well from the Zionist lobbies that influence Congress and the Senate and so on in general, and the media.
And so earlier in the program, you talked about wanting, you would have liked to see CARICOM have a stronger voice, particularly in reacting to the recent case before the International Court of Justice, the case of genocide brought by South Africa against Israel. But maybe CARICOM believes, in all of this power and all of this noise, our voice would not matter. But do you think CARICOM's voice matters in this? Is it still worth
Well, in
standing
international
up and
law,
saying
certainly,
something? Yeah.
yeah. Certainly, under international law, all sovereign states have equal rights. In law, I know in practice that's not the case, but legally they all have equal rights. So any member of CARICOM or CARICOM collectively, and there are 14 states, could have also joined with South Africa. A number of countries have joined with South Africa openly in this ICJ matter. Um, there's no reason why CARICOM couldn't have done likewise. And given our history of uh, maximum oppression and exploitation, going all the way back to the days of colonialism and enslavement, we should have been in the vanguard dealing with these matters, but unfortunately we're not.
Barbados.
Hello?
Yeah, I'm here. Barbados's position is, I think you and I spoke about this when you were here last, and I believe there's a quote somewhere of Mia Motley referring to Israel as a brave little state. Then Jamaica making up some sort of excuse and staying away from the ceasefire vote that the UN had called. Do you believe that maybe CARICOM countries are walking on eggshells because of other multilateral and bilateral concerns in the international community?
Well, unfortunately, that is a reality, but you have to take a principled position. If people didn't take a principled position, and like, for example, in the context of Barbados, we have the hero of Bassa, who was involved in the fight against enslavement, and Nanny Gregg as well. If people didn't take a principled stand, we'd still have enslavement here in Barbados or throughout the whole Caribbean. Unfortunately, standing up for principle and justice involves sacrifice. And either we are genuine in what we're saying, the politicians come up with all kinds of hyperbole and hot air, but there's very little action behind it to back it up. Belize is the only country in the region, to my knowledge, in terms of CARICOM, that has actually taken a firm position on this. They've actually suspended diplomatic relations with Israel. None of the other countries have, even though St. Vincent has issued a statement in favor or in support of uh, the ICJ and the South African action. They haven't suspended relations with Israel. So, it's quite hypocritical. And with all due respect to the Prime Minister in Barbados, excuse me, she has made the statement that what's happening in Palestine is a televised genocide, which I fully and my organization fully endorses and supports. But has she suspended diplomatic relations with this genocide country? No. Has she recognized the state of Palestine? No. So it's with all due respect, it's somewhat hypocritical and hyperbole and hot air to be making statements like that and not doing anything to back it up.
And certainly the Barbados Prime Minister has proven that she's not a shy woman. She has been at the forefront fighting some big causes on the international stage. Does it surprise you that someone who has been that vocal, she's emerging as a world leader out of the Caribbean and small Barbados, that on this issue where we're looking at the first live streamed and she said the first televised genocide, that in all of the way she has been presenting on international matters, that she seems to be so weak on this.
Well, I think our Prime Minister has ambitions to be the next Secretary General of the United Nations, and obviously she would need the support of the West to achieve that. So she probably doesn't want to put that at risk and at jeopardy. So I believe that could well be one of the motivating factors. But certainly, all countries in America's backyard, as they term it, are subject to the pressures that emanate from Washington. But as I said, in much the same way as Nanny Gregg and Bassa, and in the context of Guyana, Coffey took a principled stand which cost them their lives against enslavement, we should also be taking a principled stand against this televised genocide that our Prime Minister has described it as.
All right. I want to thank you so much for joining me on The Narrative.
All the best.
This is The Narrative. I'm your storyteller, Calistro Faria, speaking there to LaLu Hanuman. He is a member of the organization known as the Caribbean Against Apartheid in Palestine, and their latest action now is to create a movement where they would boycott, divest, and not deal with businesses that are Israeli or supported by Israelis or Israeli products, and hoping that this can be a Caribbean-wide movement that supports the BDS. More when we come back.